Good afternoon, boys and girls. It's time to go over our math solutions for DMA, and we are looking at DMA Week30 Day 3. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the first problem I want to look at is the line plot. I'm going to come back to our word problem a little later, but I want to get started with the line plot. So if we look at our data or information, it says use the information below to fill in the line plot. So with line plots, we know that line plots are on a number line, and in this case we have whole inches, and in between those whole inches we have quarter inches, which is 1/4, half, and 3/4. Each inch is broken up into 4 equal parts. So we're looking at plotting the line or the string that has the length of 8 1/4 inches. So we'll notice here that there are 4 pieces of string that have the length that are 8 whole inches and 1/4 more. So 8 1/4. So to do a line plot, you're going to place an X over each measurement for the string that you're measuring, or the data that you're measuring here. So if you notice, 4 of the pieces of string were 8 1/4 inches long. We have 2 pieces of string that are 8 1/2 inches long. So we're going to place 2 X's for those pieces of string. And then we're going to place 7 X's over the 9 1/4 inches long. So there were 7 pieces of string that were 9 7 1/4 pieces long. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now you'll notice here that we didn't have any pieces of string that were 8 3/4 or 9 inches long. So if we were to use this data, we could say that there were more pieces of string that were 9 1/4 inches long than any other length. Or if we were going to compare pieces of string, we could say that the difference between the 9 1/4 pieces of string compared to the number of 8 1/4 pieces of string would be a difference of 3, because you could take the 7 pieces minus the 4 pieces, and that means that we would need 3 more to make them the same amount. Okay, let's move on to our fraction problem. So our fraction problem asks, are these 2 fractions equivalent? Now, they are asking a yes or no question, but however, I would like for you always to make sure that you're labeling your unit parts for your figures. So we are looking at fourths for our first square, and this is a little dark, so I'm just going to put it off to the side here where the shaded part is, and 1/4. Noticing that it's the same square, except now we've taken each one of those quarters and broke it up into 2 more pieces. This being the quarter that represents that piece, this being the quarter that represents that piece, and so on for this piece and this piece right here for this section of that square. Now, the same exact amount is being represented or is shaded in each one of these squares. So we should be able to say that we know that these 2 fractions are equivalent to each other just by looking at the shaded part of our squares. So 1/4 and 2/8 are equivalent to each other. So when we write this out, instead of just writing a yes or no answer, it'd be nice to make sure that we show that equivalency in an equation. Okay, now let's move on to our multiplication and division number sentences or equations. first equation, you notice here that we are missing the dividend of our equation. We have our divisor and we have our quotient. To get our dividend, or the total objects, we know that we have 4 groups and there's 7 in each group. So to get the total number of objects that we would have to start with, we need to use our understanding of multiplication. So our first factor tells us our groups. Second factor tells us our number in each group. And once we take those factors and we multiply, we can get our product. So we have 4 groups of 7. And again, if we don't know our multiplication tables yet, we should be practicing. We can use repeated addition. 7 plus 7 is 14. Plus 7 is 21. Plus 7 is 28. So our dividend, our missing dividend, is 28. We're missing in our second equation, we're missing one of our factors. But we know the first factor, which is our groups, and we know our product, which is the total number of objects for all the groups. So if I were to take 6 groups and I were to count up to 48, I would realize that I would be using division, which is our opposite or inverse operation to multiplication. So if I were to take the 48 objects and put them into 6 groups, I would end up with 8 in each group. So my missing factor, which we could put in this particular space, we could put a letter to represent that. That is going to be 8 objects in each group. Our final equation is 4 groups of 6. We could use repeated addition, which would be 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6, or we can always use our understanding of the distributive property and say, okay, I have 4 rows of 3 and 4 groups of 3. Again, that gives me 12 and 12. So 12 and 12 would give me 24 total objects. Okay, let's move to our word problem here. So I'm just going to use a piece of paper on the side here to solve for this word problem. So the problem says the basketball team won 114 games during the regular season. So this is important information. This is how many games they won, 114 games. They lost 43 games. This is how many they lost. The question is asking us, how many more games did the basketball team win than lose? So again, we're understanding that we're using a comparison here, and we want to know, we know that they won more games than they lost, but how many more? Remember, how many more is a clue word. How many more we're using to understand that we're subtracting our number of games won compared to the number of games lost. So we're going to use 114 and we're going to label that with 1, and we're going to subtract that 43 from the games that we lost. Now, if you notice here, we do not have a hundreds place to subtract. So if we just take our 114 and subtract 40, we're going to subtract 10, which would be 104, and then subtract 30 more, which would be 74. So basically what I did here is I broke this down as 10 and 30 when I subtracted. So now I've subtracted my tens place. I'm going to take the 74 now and subtract the 3. which is in the ones place, and that is going to give me 71. So we found that they won 71 more games than they lost. And we are going to label that here in our equation. When we go to write this out, we would definitely say the team won 71 more games than they lost, because if I subtract 114 minus 40, I would have 74. Then I subtract 3 more, which is making this 43 here, and that would give me 71 games more than won than lost. That's it for DMA Day 3. We will see you tomorrow with DMA Day 4, Week 30.